They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats.
In my opinion, the Jewish people would have a lot to do with the loss if I'm at 40%.
Some sick people, radical left lunatics, and I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military.
You know, if you had one day, like one real rough, nasty day, and I mean real rough, the word will get out and it will end immediately. He's Hitler! And then they say, he's a Nazi! I'm not a Nazi. I'm the opposite of a Nazi.
What do we think of when we think of America? Hot dogs? Rodeos? Police brutality? Whatever you think about the ironically named Land of the Free, you're going to be forced, probably at gunpoint, because let's face it, this is America we're talking about, to watch the United States of America's 60th and probably last presidential election. But before you cast your ballot and prepare for the now inevitable coming Second American Civil War, why not have one last think about how one of the two candidates has been saying increasingly Hitlerian phrases on the campaign trail in recent weeks?
Talking about Hitler and Nazi and...
Which, thanks to a uniquely uninspiring and bloodthirsty alternative candidate, has barely hurt his chances of becoming president for a second time. If you're watching this from the future, and Trump is not in fact president, get ready for the next election, when the Republicans will field either him again, or someone just as bad as him. And this video becomes relevant all over again. Get ready for some historical events to repeat themselves, albeit an ocean and a century apart. Or at least to rhyme. And to rhyme German with English is surprisingly hard. So come with me, whether you're American or one of the citizens of every other country on Earth whose political system only exists so long as it remains sufficiently deferent to the United States, and explore with me how Donald J. Trump, whether knowingly or unknowingly, is spouting more Hitler talking points than Kanye West after the divorce.
I know many of them. It's just this amorphous group of people. But they're smart and they're vicious. And we have to defeat them. And when I say the enemy from within, the other side goes crazy, becomes a sound. Oh, how can he say? No, they've done very bad things to this country. They are indeed the enemy from within. But this is who we're fighting.
Hello, my name is Brigitte Empire, world-renowned fake journalist and science and culture correspondent for the Daily Telegraph. Surprisingly, not the British newspaper that printed Hitler's diaries. That was the Daily Mail. We're too old for that. Most of our employees were alive for that time that Donald Trump insists America was great, and we're good without smallpox, typhoid, and slavery, thank you very much. Today, I'm going to be going over some of the most Hitlerian moments in Donald Trump's most recent election campaign. The former president has been compared to Hitler for years now, and I'm here to get to the bottom of just how accurate that comparison really is, using his own statements and the history of the Third Reich, to settle, once and for all, whether these comparisons are a result of just liberals overreacting, or whether he is as potentially dangerous as the greatest evil of the previous century. Before I get into the examples though, I should stress that it's not just liberals or the left that compared Trump to the Führer. J.D. Vance, Trump's current vice president, famously once referred to Trump as America's Hitler. Former aides have called him a fascist, and recent news even showed Trump himself made these comparisons. According to General John Kelly, Trump's former White House chief of staff, Trump expressed admiration for Hitler on multiple occasions, and once remarked to Kelly that he wanted the kind of generals that Hitler had, people that were totally loyal to him, that follow orders. You can make the argument that just because he admires the guy, it doesn't mean that he'll try and be just like him, but you have to admit that this is worrying, no? Even when Fox News tried to run cover for this story, they didn't manage to make any convincing arguments. Brian Kilmeade, for example, tried to excuse this by suggesting that maybe Trump didn't know that Hitler's generals were Nazis. If this were true, it would perhaps be even more worrying, because it would mean that he had worse understanding of history than most 5-year-olds. Other Republicans dismissed this, saying it was just par for the course, that he was always saying those kinds of things. The only other responses besides suggesting Trump was either stupid or just going on about how great Hitler was all the time were deflections. Former Fox News host Bill O'Reilly, for example, said the reporting was fake because General Kelly hates Trump. And CNN's Scott Jennings had the most baffling take of all, saying, if Kelly is worried about Hitler and is worried about fascism, he ought to pick up the newspaper. There's thousands of Hitlers running around this country right now, running around college campuses, running around New York City, chasing Jewish people around, blocking their access on college campuses. If you're worried about Hitler and you're talking about Donald Trump, Maybe open your eyes and take in what's happening on the American left in this country. Those are the Hitlers I'm worried about. It's hard to even dignify that with a response, but just to put it out there, people marching for a free Palestine, demanding an end to the current G-word in the Middle East, are not thousands of Hitlers. They're quite the opposite. But even in some bizarre world where they were, they're not running for president. And Trump is, so why would you deflect and point to them, when the question is this guy, who's likely to win the presidency again, a fan of a certain failed Austrian painter? And will he follow in his footsteps if given another chance?
He's Hitler. And then they say he's a Nazi.
And given that another news report came out this week claiming Trump said Hitler did some good things too, that's not as far-fetched a question as those who want to hold their nose and vote for Trump would like to admit. So, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, even Trump himself have compared the Orange Man to Adolf Hitler. But while Orange Man bad, is Orange Man Hitler levels of bad? Let's find out, and then we can tackle the coconut tree in the room, and the Hitlerian things happening right now, while the other candidate is currently vice president, that are stopping people voting for the Democrats with good reason. After all, it's hard to persuade someone to vote to stop fascism from coming to America when crimes of such a caliber are already happening and are guaranteed to continue at the hands of the only alternative.
Prisons and jails, mental institutions, and insane asylums. You know, they go crazy when I say the late, great Hannibal Lecter. Okay, they say, why would he mention Hannibal Lecter? He must be cognitively in trouble. No, these are real stories. Hannibal Lecter from Silence of the Lamb. He's a lovely man. He wants to have you for dinner. He'd like to have you for dinner.
At a rally in Erie, Pennsylvania in late September, star of Home Alone 2, Donald J. Trump, painted a picture of an America riddled with crime, with gangs of immigrant leftist cat-eaters running around, looting every shop in sight, and causing the famously meek and mild-mannered American police to cower with fear, unable to do anything to stop them, despite the fact that crime is down, and the fact that immigrants commit less crime than naturalized Americans, and the fact that cops in America are famous the world over for having more bloodlust than a vampire in a phlebotomy clinic. In the former president's own words,
You see these guys walking out with air conditioners, with refrigerators on their back, the craziest thing. And the police aren't allowed to do their job. They're told, if you do anything, you're going to lose your pension, you're going to lose your family, your house, your car. The police want to do it. The Border Patrol wants to do it. Border Patrol, they're incredible. They want to do it. They're not allowed to do it because the liberal left won't let them do it. The liberal left wants to destroy them, and they want to destroy our country. You know, if you had one day, like one real rough, nasty day with the drugstores as an example, smart people, they're not so stupid, but they have to be taught. Now, if you had one really violent day, like a guy like Mike Kelly, put him in charge, one rough hour, and I mean real rough, the word will get out and it will end immediately. End immediately.
Now, of course, since the liberal left won't let the police stop whatever the fuck looting Trump made up at the start of this quote, that would imply that the defund the police movement was much more successful than I thought from way over here in Europe. Here I was thinking that the entire political class closed ranks, arrested protesters in their hundreds, and gave more money than ever to the cops. But Trump and we don't live in the same reality. So I'm sure in whatever mirror universe he's going to get his news, some really cool and base things have been happening, while over here everything's been going to hell in a handbasket. Now, this whole one really violent day thing got a lot of people talking about The Purge, the horror movie series where crime is legal for just one day, but Trump isn't saying all crime will be legal. Quite the opposite, actually. He's saying the state will be sent in to violently crack down, with more force than ever before. And if you know the American police, you'll know that they've used plenty of force even back when their budgets were far below what they had today. They leveled entire blocks in black neighborhoods even before they had tanks in every small town and enough AKs to start a civil war in every country on the planet in each precinct. What Trump is actually suggesting here is actually reminiscent of one of the key events in the history of the Third Reich, however, the Night of Broken Glass, or Kristallnacht in German, a night of incredible violence that arguably began the worst crime in human history. The Night of Broken Glass was a turning point, where the Third Reich moved beyond political and economic discrimination, and the began in earnest. So when Trump calls for one really violent day, just picture this. November 9th, 1938. Throughout Germany and Austria, thousands of Jewish people are startled awake by the sound of breaking glass and roaring flames. Synagogues set aflame, businesses and homes pillaged. 91 people die, 30,000 people sent to the camps, 7,000 businesses destroyed, 900 synagogues burned to the ground. According to PBS, a report back to the US State Department from an American official in Leipzig said of the event, "Having demolished dwellings and hurled most of the movable effects to the streets, the insatiably sadistic perpetrators threw many of the trembling inmates into a small stream that flows through the zoological park, commanding horrified spectators to spit at them, defile them with mud, and jeer at their plight." How could such a thing be allowed to happen? These people had committed no crime, done nothing wrong. Well, one man, Herschel Gunspan, a name I probably really butchered, had shot a German official in Paris after his parents were deported, hoping to alert the world to what was being done to the Jewish people by the regime. He told the French police, "Being a Jew is not a crime. I am not a dog. I have a right to live, and the Jewish people have a right to exist on Earth. Wherever I have been, I've been chased like an animal." In response, Joseph Goebbels, Minister of Propaganda, called for one really violent night, to paraphrase, and demanded people take to the streets and take their revenge upon the Jewish population. Orders were then given to the police. Businesses and the homes of Jews were ripe for destruction, and police should arrest as many Jews as possible. The next day, Goebbels made yet another announcement. "We shed not a tear for the Jews." He went on to comment on the destruction of synagogues, saying, "They stood in the way long enough. We can use the space made free more usefully than as Jewish fortresses." In mid-September 2024, the most financially unsuccessful host of The Apprentice, Donald J. Trump, was at the Israeli-American Council National Summit in Washington, which, as someone not from America, why does that exist? Anyway, Trump, at a summit trying to schmooze advocates for the US's second favourite settler colony besides itself, said, in a statement that rightly worried a lot of people, that if he lost the election in November, it would be the fault of Jewish Americans. In his own words, "If I don't win this election, and the Jewish people would really have a lot to do with that if that happens, because if 40%, 60% of the people are voting for the enemy."
In my opinion, the Jewish people would have a lot to do with a loss if I'm at 40%.
Trump has reportedly made similar comments at previous summits, referring to the fact that Jewish people tend to lean Democrat, something he apparently does not understand because he associates all Jewish people with Israel, because he's deeply anti-Semitic. Now, I probably don't need to tell you that blaming Jewish people for losing in politics isn't a new thing. From medieval England to Germans on crusade to the Reconquista, it's an age-old story in Europe that outsiders suffer for grievances that have nothing to do with them, whether that be Jewish people, Romanian travellers, or in more recent decades, Muslims. The West loves to find scapegoats, and to commit atrocity after atrocity against these scapegoats, rather than address any of the underlying material problems that made their societies angry to the point of violence in the first place. After all, the ones causing these problems, the ruling class, are the same people that give the orders to do this violence, and that make the propaganda that tells people whose fault these problems are. As they say where I come from, when a rich man is in trouble, he sacks the servants. It was sentiments like those Trump made on that night in mid-September, however, that led to the Third Reich coming to power in the first place. In the wake of World War I, a German state, recently having come into its national identity, one built on military might, could not process the idea of having lost the war. Even in its final days, many even in the senior command were in denial. In order to make sense of this unbelievable turn of events, a narrative began to form to placate the nationalists. The German army only lost because it was betrayed. It was stabbed in the back. This Doktos in German, I probably butchered that as well, posited that the social unrest in Germany during the war was the sole reason the war was lost, and those associated with them on the front lines. For this, the nationalists blamed Jews and blamed socialists. And in the minds of many, especially those in Hitler's orbit, those two groups are one and the same. This narrative was pushed even by those in the highest ranks of the military, including General Ludendorff himself. German military command concealed what it had confessed to the political leadership in Berlin, that it feared German troops in France were on the verge of being routed. To avoid a public loss of face, it claimed that non-military reasons lay behind Germany's critical military situation. Ludendorff, the de facto highest commander of Germany's troops, had added an explanation by inventing the stab-in-the-back doctrine. Germany had sued for an armistice, he asserted in a confidential talk with his officers, because it had become impossible to continue the war. This was due to the poison of Marxist socialist propaganda that had undermined the soldiers' resolution to go on fighting and made them unreliable, although the chances of a successful defense, if not victory, continued to be good. Or, as Adolf himself said, the present political leaders are forced to seek support solely by those who took and take advantage of the change of the German situation, and who therefore were also the driving force behind the revolution, by the Jews. As Klaus Schwabe explains in World War I and the rise of Hitler, the transitional Jews' dominance he had observed in Munich at the time of the Council's Republic only reinforced his fixed idea of the pernicious role the Jews had played as instigators of the November Revolution. The German people had to make sure that there would not be another Dolchstoß and no other defeat in a war. In Hitler's mind, anti-Semitism merged with his anti-communism, creating the bogey of a Jewish Bolshevism. His fixation on the victors provided the frame of his propaganda against the young plan. To him, based on the Allied war guilt lie as his justification, which in the eyes of its frequently Jewish authors from international high finance had no other purpose than to transform our people economically and mentally into global white Negroes. What's the German word for yikes? Ugh. So, have you noticed how often Trump has been talking about the enemy within recently? Like, just listen to this speech. Those nations who are still opposed to us will someday recognize the greater enemy within. Then they will join us in a combined front, a front against Jewish exploitation and racial degeneration. Yeah, okay, sorry, I lied. That wasn't a Trump speech. That was his German counterpart. How about this then? When I was talking about the Dolchstoß before, I actually wasn't quite done. Aside from the whole blaming Jewish people thing, another phrase now frequently used by Trump, particularly during his 2024 presidential campaign rallies, comes from this famous anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, that the German army was defeated not by the enemies it was obviously easily winning against on the battlefield, but by the enemies from within. The socialists, the Marxists, the radical left, as Trump would say. The officers peddling the conspiracy theory that swept the Third Reich into power said the same things.
I know many of them. It's just this amorphous group of people. But they're smart and they're vicious.
The enemy within. A conspiracy, in their minds, of Judeo-Bolshevism.
And we have to defeat them. And when I say the enemy from within, the other side goes crazy.
In their minds, socialism was part of a Jewish plot against the German state.
No, they've done very bad things to this country. They are indeed the enemy from within. But this is who we're fighting.
During the Second World War II, as the Greater War turned against the Germans, the Fuhrer once again took the failure out on his scapegoats, for those he hated so much that he had made that hatred the foundation for his entire project. British intelligence, on the eve of the was tracking Hitler's growing preoccupation with the enemy within, by which of course he meant the Jewish people. The document was found among a collection of papers belonging to the family of Mark Abrams, a social scientist who worked with BBC's Overseas Propaganda Analysis Unit and the Psychological Warfare Branch during World War II. Written just as the war was starting to turn against Hitler, it shows that British analysts had noticed signs of developing paranoia in his speechmaking and, chillingly, a growing preoccupation with what he called the Jewish poison. At the time that it was written, the tide had started to turn against Germany, Anthony said. In response, Hitler began to turn his attentions to the German home front. This document shows that British intelligence sensed this happening. McCarthy recognized that, faced with external failure, the Nazi leader was focusing on a perceived enemy within instead, namely the Jews. Given that we now know the was commencing, this makes for poignant reading. And you don't have to go much further from there to connect the horrors of the Third Reich to the promises and the lies of the Trump campaign. The lies he repeated during the presidential debate about Haitian immigrants eating cats and dogs, painting them as monsters, was compared by multiple outlets to the blood libel, the age-old conspiracy theory that Jewish people used the blood of Christian children to make matzah, the textbook anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, and on its face, a ludicrous smear. So too are these lies about Haitians. Although I don't quite feel comfortable drawing a direct line here, for reasons of, well, history, and also because animals and babies, they're two different things. The spirit, however, is there, and the smears work in the same way. People who are already primed to hate the target of the smear will use it to justify and intensify their pre-existing disgust, and will push them from irritation and harsh words closer to outright violence. Those who recognize it rightly as a falsehood dismiss it as ridiculous, because it is. But it is important that we recognize that it is as dangerous as it is false. This is an important tool in radicalizing the people that Trump needs to get his violent work done.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
You don't need to be a historian to see the obvious connections between accusing Jews of eating children and Haitians of eating pets. And since the Haitian Revolution, Americans have often treated Haitians as the embodiment of the terrifying racial other, in the same way that Europeans displaced their fears and resentments onto Jews. Marianne Williamson helpfully made the subtext the text in a tweet saying that Democrats dismissed Trump's lies at their peril because Haitian voodoo is in fact real. The same is true with another Vance lie about Springfield, that Haitians are responsible for a surge in communicable diseases, including HIV/AIDS. I say it's a lie because there's no public evidence supporting it, and authorities on the ground contradict it. Once again, however, this lie has a deeply troubling history. Immigrants have long been falsely accused of bringing disease to keep them out. Nazis did the same to Jews. Specifically, Nazi propaganda would regularly accuse Jews of spreading typhus, a lice-borne disease that killed millions in early 20th century Europe. Much like HIV, typhus was a stigmatized ailment, stereotypically associated with the moral defectiveness or dirtiness of the afflicted. Nazi doctors wrote pseudoscientific papers accusing Jews of spreading typhus due to our alleged low cultural level and uncleanliness, part of the justification for cramming Jews into Polish ghettos, before shipping my ancestors and the co-religionists to. And don't forget that Trump has promised on multiple occasions to carry out the biggest mass deportation of migrants in the history of the United States. How do you think that's going to go? What happens when people don't go? Because this also was the Third Reich's initial plan for their victims. People these days seem to think that a fascist starts by doing what the Third Reich was doing when it was overthrown. But they're wrong. Deportation was the original plan. Then there were too many victims that were put into camps, and then, well, you know the next part. And it's not as if Trump isn't aware of this. On April the 20th, Trump was asked whether he would build new detention camps as part of this mass deportation plan, and his response was, "I would not rule out anything, but there wouldn't be that much need for them," because, he said, the plan is to deport migrants to the US illegally back to their home countries as quickly as possible. "We're not leaving them in the country. We're bringing them out." We've heard this all before. Trump said he would use National Guard troops to assist in his planned deportation efforts, but also did not rule out deploying active military forces to help. "I don't think I'd have to do that. I think the National Guard would be able to do that. If they were able to, then I'd just use the military." This has happened before. It can happen again. It's happening now. "Well, these aren't civilians. These are people who aren't legally in our country. This is an invasion of our country." Trump has used dehumanizing terminology to describe immigrants in the US illegally, calling them animals when talking about alleged criminal acts, and saying they are poisoning the blood of our country, a phrase that has drawn criticism as xenophobic and echoing Nazi rhetoric.
They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done. I said, no, they're not humans. They're not humans. They're animals.
So, we have to stop this, right? Well, you do. I don't live in the United States, and my mum didn't take citizenship when it was offered to her. My grandma being from New York isn't enough for me to have a voting stake in the US election, apparently. Which would be fine if the United States didn't dictate the policy of the entire world. So, don't vote for Trump, right? But that goes without saying. But the more important question is, should you vote for Kamala Harris? She's the only other viable candidate, right? The only way Trump doesn't get voted in is if Kamala gets people out voting for her, or all of Trump's base just doesn't show up. So why am I sitting here feeling like Chapel Roan?
Fuck Trump, for fucking real, but fuck some of the shit that has gone down in the Democratic Party that has failed people like me and you. And more so, Palestine.
In the face of this absolute monster, who is in recent months dialed up and up on the fascist rhetoric, why can I not endorse the only other viable candidate? Well, how evil can a lesser evil be before settling for it is truly unconscionable? In the 1932 German presidential election, the incumbent, Paul the Lesser Evil von Hindenburg, won 53% of the vote. Adolf, 100% Hitler received 37% of the vote. The German people chose the lesser evil, and the communists got 10%. In retrospect, if you were trying to do lesser evil voting, you would have voted communist, if only the Americans had such a choice. But that's not how people think, apparently. Hindenburg had the best chance of beating Hitler, and he did. And then, after winning, he made Hitler chancellor, gave Hitler emergency powers, and then died, leaving Hitler in charge before he could say, "Don't blame me, I voted for Hindenburg." One of the most alarming policies of the Trump years was his horrific and inhumane border policy. It's now Democratic policy, and one of the central pledges of Kamala Harris's platform. She even highlighted it in her final speech to appeal to voters. We're now just supposed to accept that build the wall and separate families and build concentration camps on the border is the consensus in DC. And it's not just on the border that Harris has conceded to the most Hitlerian wing of the Republican Party. But even if she hadn't, there is another world leader out there right now doing crimes on the scale of the Third Reich, with unlimited money, support, and arms from the US, from Kamala Harris in her position as vice president. Is this the lesser evil? Well, it's certainly evil.
My commitment to the security of Israel is unwavering. And let us be clear, Iran is not only a threat to Israel, Iran is also a threat to American personnel in the region, American interests, and innocent civilians across the region who suffer at the hands of Iran-based and backed proxies. We will never hesitate to take whatever action is necessary to defend U.S. forces and interests against Iran.
So, what do we do? Well, first and foremost, we have to fight to end this. Ending these horrors is more important than voting, even in this election, because this is happening now. Secondly, don't vote for fucking Trump. Beyond that, listen, everyone has their red lines. I didn't vote for Labour in the last election for a multitude of reasons, but for me and many people like me, the moment they turned on trans people, they lost my vote. Democrats are now basically saying, let the states decide on trans care, which A, sucks ass, and B, was Trump's position when he was originally running in 2016 before he then had to actually be president and took every opportunity to just shit on trans people at, every turn. An administration doing this? Is that a lesser evil? Vote how you want, as long as you don't vote for Trump. But beyond however you vote or don't vote, organize, protest. Let the administration know that you will fight them at every turn if they don't end weapons shipments, if they continue to defend Netanyahu and his regime. In most places, and demonstrably in the United States, civil disobedience and direct action has done more for the marginalized and those suffering under the US war machine than voting ever did. But if Trump does get in, know what you're up against. There will be much, much more fighting to do against someone who's sounding more and more like an American Adolf every day. With that in mind, personally, especially after the deluge of horrific talking points and more Night of the Long Knives and Enemy Within talk at the Madison Square Garden rally, I think if I were American, I would... if I can even get this out of my mouth, I would probably have to vote for Harris and then throw up blood for 3 days straight. Because really, what kind of world are we living in where these are the choices? Annihilation or annihilation plus? At that point, I'd just be voting to keep Trump out, but then how much is actually giving approval to someone doing the worst crimes anyone can? Even as I'm saying it, I'm not sure if I believe it. I don't know if I could. What is clear is that something fundamental needs to change. This cannot go on. The Republican Party is just captured by fascism now. This isn't going away. A two-party system has no way of fighting this. Even when Trump's gone, the next candidate will be another Trump. Hell, even multi-party systems struggle with this. This two-party system doesn't stand a fucking chance. And speaking of America First rallies at Madison Square Garden...
Well, in 1939, the Nazis used Madison Square Garden. Well, and you know what? But can you imagine?
On the evening of February the 20th, 1939, the marquee of New York's Madison Square Garden was lit up with the evening's main event, a pro-American rally. The organizers had chosen the date in celebration of George Washington's birthday and had procured a 30-foot-tall banner of America's first president for the stage. More than 20,000 men and women streamed inside and took their seats. The view they had was stunning. Washington was hung between American flags and swastikas. At Madison Square Garden, the rally opened with a pledge of allegiance to the American flag. The mood was jubilant. Attendees wore Nazi armbands, waved American flags, and held aloft posters with slogans like, "Stop Jewish domination of Christian America." There were stormtroopers in the aisles, their uniforms almost identical to those of Nazi Germany. It looked like any political rally, only with a Nazi twist, said Arnie Bernstein, author of Swastika Nation. The speeches were explicitly anti-Semitic, and tirades against job-taking Jewish refugees were met with thunderous applause. They demanded a white, Gentile America. They denounced Roosevelt as Rosenfeld, to say that Roosevelt was in the pocket of rich Jews, said Sarah Churchwell, author of Behold America. In equal measure to the xenophobia, the speeches were loaded with American boosterism.
Not even the obvious ones, but the big lie. You know what the big lie is? The big lie is that they're impressive. That's what the big lie is.
I get back and they go, Sid, you want to speak at this MSG thing? I go, sure. Out of character for me to speak at a Nazi rally. I was just in Israel, but I took the gig.
And she has resettled them into your communities to prey upon innocent American citizens. But the day I take the oath of office, the migrant invasion of our country ends and the restoration of our country begins.
This happened before. It's happening now. From open xenophobia and racism, calling for violence against political enemies and those who won't vote for them, calling for mass deportations, tirades against an enemy within. What does that look like to you? At some point you have to ask, is there any coming back from this point? And the answer is not no and, it's yes but. This is a broken system, and broken systems don't fix themselves. Carrying on as normal and pretending everything is fine just highlights the parts that are broken, lets them rot even further. And Trump, well, he lives in that rot. He doesn't want to change the system, he wants to use it to punish his enemies. Hell, Kamala's been doing a lot of that herself. Either something fundamentally shifts, or this whole system is going to go extinct. Anything that refuses to bend under enough strain will break. And sometimes, rather than trying to salvage a brittle system, it's better for everyone involved to try a new one. Whichever party wins, American foreign policy is a blight upon the earth. And something has to change. That change will not happen by voting. That change happens by organising, pressuring those in places of power, and creating room for something new, something better to take its place. Right now, the American state seems invincible. Capitalism and American hegemony is the way of the world, but nothing lasts forever. All empires eventually fall. And in the words of the great Ursula K. Le Guin, we live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable. But then, so did the divine right of kings. Thanks for watching.
The first time it was a tragedy, the second time it's a farce. That's since 1933, so I'm leading the bar, but I don't know.
Hey, thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. If you liked it, why not give it a like, leave a comment, subscribe, tell your friends, and if you want to give me some money, you should, because I need it. I'm in a minus 2,000 overdraft and have been for years. I would like to get out of it one day. That's my dream. It's a dream that is quite pathetic, but I'd like to do it. So if you want to help, you can give me one-time donations on Coffee or PayPal, links below as always, or sign up to my Patreon or YouTube membership, where you get early videos, access to the members of the Discord, my Nintendo Switch friend code, and exclusive content, such as interviews with some of your favourite YouTubers. In addition to all that good stuff, you'll also get your name read out at the end of each video, just like these lovely people. Quesadilla de Tortilla Azul, Leron, Adam Lees, Danielle Nevels, no, not that Paul, MB, Madeline Aguirre, Ben Murphy, Lex Phoenix, Endo Credits, Janelle, Meridi, Jane Senior, Bo Ear, James W, Marvin, or Tamsin, Bob the Builder 5445554, Deborah Laboon, Vegas, Silzethenium, Vince Whitaker, Amelia Unchained, Sarah, Jason Haig, Frank McManus, Susan Foster, Helena Riel, Sierra Whiskey, Orestria, Anna Cathill, John N. Scully, Lloyd Luciente, Jason Cribbett, Shield Daden, Robin Podolsky, Turtle Troom, Casual Observer, Monterey, Courtney Burmack, Sleepy Slug, Philip Sprogger, Soma Piglet, Brain Douche, Artie Wolf, Greg Noble, Deanna McMillan, Carolyn Regalado, Alexandra Lilly, Howard Lott, Nerony Scarjan, and Joey Cobalt. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Don't vote for Donald Trump.
Prisons and jails, mental institutions, and insane asylums. You know, they go crazy when I say the late, great Hannibal Lecter. Okay, they say, why would he mention Hannibal Lecter? He must be cognitively in trouble. No, these are real stories. Hannibal Lecter from Silence of the Lamb. He's a lovely man. He wants to have you for dinner. He'd like to have you for dinner.
Do not come. do not come.
There's no place in America the president shouldn't be able to come.
I'm going to come.